300 didn't just redefine action cinema. It hit a truth most viewers never suspected. The slow motion, the blood-soaked heroics, the mythic power, all of it looked controlled, stylized, safe. But nearly 2 decades later, Gerard Butler is finally admitting it wasn't. In 2025, Butler broke his silence with a chilling confession. Every day, somebody was getting taken to the hospital. Broken bones, real injuries. Actors speared in the eye during simple scenes. What looked like a graphic novel fantasy under Zack Snyder's vision was, behind the scenes, pure chaos. For 18 years, the cast stayed quiet while the film made nearly $450 million worldwide. Now, the truth is coming out, and it changes how you see 300 forever. Fact 1. Nobody wanted it. At first, nobody wanted it. A hyper-stylized war epic based on a graphic novel set in ancient Greece with no proven box office stars, it sounded like a guaranteed failure. Studios passed. Executives nodded politely. It was too risky, too strange, too loud for comfort. But Zack Snyder wasn't backing down. Instead of waiting for permission, he took pages from Frank Miller's graphic novel, gathered a handful of stunt performers, and shot his own proof of concept. What he created was a brutal, blood-soaked demo reel that looked nothing like conventional Hollywood filmmaking. He lit it like myth and cut it like music. Every frame sent a clear message. This wasn't meant to be history. It was legend, and that gamble paid off. Warner Brothers didn't just approve the project, they handed Snyder the reins. In an industry obsessed with safe choices, 300 was greenlit because one filmmaker bet on his vision and changed the rules by doing it. Fact 2. The Miller influence. Frank Miller didn't stumble into Sparta by accident. He'd been carrying it with him since childhood. As a boy, he watched the 1962 film The 300 Spartans, and something lodged itself deep in his imagination. It wasn't just the battles. It was the sacrifice, the defiance, the idea of a last stand against impossible odds. That image stayed with him for decades. And when Miller finally returned to the story, he wasn't interested in realism or historical accuracy. He wanted myth. His version was violent, exaggerated, and drenched in shadow, a fantasy shaped by childhood awe and hardened by adult anger. For Miller, the story wasn't about facts. It was about honor and obsession, glory and madness, and the thin, terrifying line between immortality and death. Fact 3. Casting Gerard Butler. They weren't convinced at first. He seemed too intense, too unfamiliar, too Scottish for what they had in mind. But Gerard Butler didn't walk into that casting room hoping to be chosen. He walked in determined to be remembered. He didn't wait for direction. He didn't ease into the moment. He stood up, bellowed the line, and sent a chair flying across the room. "This is Sparta!" The room went silent. No one laughed. It didn't feel like acting. It felt like a declaration. That moment didn't just win him the role, it defined it. And in that instant, Butler didn't just audition for Leonidas, he claimed him. Fact 4. Leonidas never flinched. Neither did the man playing him. Gerard Butler didn't hide behind padding or tricks. He wore the pain. Training was brutal, the choreography unforgiving, and Butler pushed himself harder than anyone else on set. He tore muscles in the middle of scenes and took blows that left deep bruises, sometimes drawing blood. There were days he could barely lift his shield. Still, he refused to stop. He kept moving, kept fighting, because for him, playing a Spartan meant earning the role, not faking it. So when he shouted, "This is Sparta," it wasn't just performance. It was exhaustion, injury, and sheer willpower crashing into one roar. Fact 5. The 300 workout. There were no stunt doubles and no digital shortcuts, just pain. To look like warriors forged in bronze, the cast of 300 endured a training regimen so extreme it earned its own name, the 300 workout. It wasn't about building muscle for the camera, it was punishment. The routine meant flipping massive tires, sprinting uphill, endless push-ups, pull-ups, kettlebells, training until collapse, then doing it all over again. Gerard Butler later said some actors cried, others threw up, and everyone reached a breaking point. By the end, every man on set had earned the armor on his back. They didn't train like actors preparing for a role, they trained like Spartans preparing for war. Fact 6, the phalanx, the wall of shields, the synchronized march, the crushing sense of unity. The phalanx wasn't a cinematic invention, it was real and it was terrifying. In ancient Sparta, warriors fought as a single body, no space for ego, no room for mistakes. Each man's shield protected the one beside him. In 300, Zack Snyder transformed that formation into a moving wall of death, tight, brutal, and relentless. It wasn't just a battle tactic, it was who they were. The rule was simple: stay in formation and live. Break it, and you die. Fact 7. Historical roots. None of the movements were random. Long before the slow motion and stylized violence, the fight team immersed themselves in real Greek warfare. They studied shield strikes, spear thrusts, and phalanx tactics, learning why every formation existed and what every movement was meant to do. Those ancient techniques became the foundation. Then they were pushed further, intensified, sharpened, and shaped into cinematic moments that felt like graphic novel panels brought to life. The approach was often described as historical myth, grounded in truth, but exaggerated for impact. And when the Spartans moved across the screen, they weren't just soldiers anymore. They felt like a force of nature. Fact 8. Digital gore. The blood wasn't meant to splash. It was meant to move. Zack Snyder never wanted violence that felt raw or realistic, like news footage. He wanted something surreal, stylized, almost hypnotic. Every spray and slash was digitally crafted, too red, too clean, too dramatic on purpose. It wasn't just about gore, it was about rhythm. Each strike landed in time with the music, each wound framed like a single frozen moment. The violence moved the way Frank Miller's panels did, sharp, exaggerated, and unforgettable. Fact 9. The virtual battlefield. There was no Greece, no hills, no sea, no blazing sun, just a massive warehouse in Montreal filled with blue screens and imagination. Nearly 90% of 300 was filmed on a soundstage. No real cliffs, no castles, just actors swinging swords in empty space, trusting the vision. And somehow, it worked. Zack Snyder and his team built an entire world from nothing. Storms were painted in later. Firelight and stone were forged with digital tools and bold color grading. Pixels were shaped into something ancient. They didn't recreate history. They created myth. Fact 10. The agoge. The legend begins far too early. In ancient Sparta, children weren't raised. They were forged. By the age of 7, boys were taken from their families and sent into the agoge, a ruthless state-run system built on pain and discipline. There was no comfort, only hunger, beatings, and constant tests of survival. Weakness was punished. Mercy didn't exist. By the time they returned home, childhood was already gone. 300 only hints at it, but that brutal upbringing is what turned ordinary boys into Spartans. Fact 11. The God King. He towered over everyone, gleamed in gold, and spoke in whispers that felt like thunder. But the God King of Persia didn't simply walk onto set, he was carefully constructed. Rodrigo Santoro spent more than 5 hours a day in the makeup chair, having piercings applied, chains glued to his body, and his skin painted to shine like metal. In post-production, his voice was lowered and his eyes subtly enhanced. But the rest, the stillness, the dominance, the unsettling calm, came from Santoro himself. What appeared on screen wasn't just costume and effects. It was a complete transformation. Fact 12. The technique of the crush. It didn't resemble other war films. It barely felt like Earth at all. That's because 300 didn't rely on simple filters. It introduced an entirely new color process known as the crush. The technique allowed Zack Snyder to push contrast and tone to their limits. Bronze skin, deep red blood, ink-black skies, each frame was sculpted by hand. The process took months, with every silhouette shaped through shadow and exaggeration. It wasn't realism, it was style turned into substance, and in doing so, 300 reshaped the visual language of action films for years to come. Fact 13. Fighting for glory. They weren't fighting just to survive, they were fighting for glory. To the Spartans, war wasn't a last resort. It was a way of life, governed by honor, duty, and a single unforgiving rule: never retreat, never surrender. From the moment they were born, Spartan boys were prepared for violence. By age 7, they were taken from their families and sent into the agoge, a system designed to strip away fear and replace it with discipline. By the time they carried a spear, the message was unmistakable: return with your shield or return on it. 300 didn't invent that mindset, it only hinted at it. When Leonidas declares, "Spartans, prepare for glory," he isn't rallying loyalty. He's reminding them that death was always part of the promise. Fact 14. It wasn't meant to be tender. In a story drenched in blood and shields, tenderness wasn't supposed to exist. And yet, when Leonidas turned to Gorgo for the last time, the armor cracked. Her quiet words, "Come back with your shield or on it." His look, the silence between them. It landed harder than any battle cry. Some of that farewell was written, but the power came from instinct, the pause, the weight in their eyes, the understanding of what was about to be lost. Zack Snyder didn't rush the moment. He didn't call cut. He let it breathe. And in a film built on war and sacrifice, that single quiet goodbye left the deepest wound. Fact 15. The Tree of the Dead. It looks like something pulled from a horror fantasy, but it wasn't. In 300, there's a moment that halts the Spartan march completely: the grotesque Tree of the Dead, built from butchered villagers and displayed as a warning. That image never existed in the original graphic novel. It was created during rewrites, after Warner Brothers asked for a scene that made the brutality of the Persian invasion unmistakable. Co-writer Kurt Johnstad drew inspiration from something disturbingly real. He remembered stories from the war in Yugoslavia, villages where bodies were arranged deliberately as psychological warfare meant to terrify enemies before a single blow was struck. He brought the idea to Zack Snyder, who immediately understood its power. The result was an image so shocking it needed no dialogue, no music, no explanation. Because sometimes the most haunting moments in a fantasy film aren't imagined at all. They're borrowed from real, human cruelty. Fact 16. Conquering the box office. Nobody saw it coming. A hyper-violent, R-rated war film based on a graphic novel packed with slow motion, blood, and style, but no major stars and almost no real locations. On paper, 300 wasn't supposed to work. It didn't just bend the rules, it shattered them. Word of mouth caught fire. Fans showed up in armor. Midnight screenings spilled into sold-out weekends. And before Hollywood could react, the film had charged past $450 million worldwide on a $65 million budget. It crushed expectations, outperformed prestige films, and silenced every executive who had dismissed it as too weird or too risky. 300 proved you didn't need realism or household names, just a fearless vision and the nerve to commit to it. The film wasn't designed to play it safe. It was built to conquer. And neither was the director. Before 300, Zack Snyder was best known as the stylish filmmaker behind Dawn of the Dead, talented, but still untested at the highest level. Then 300 exploded. Its look, its violence, its unapologetic boldness felt less like a movie and more like a statement. Critics were divided, but audiences were all in. Overnight, studios were asking the same question: who is Zack Snyder? The answer came fast. He was handed some of Hollywood's biggest modern myths: Watchmen, Man of Steel, and the foundation of the DC universe. Snyder didn't adapt to the system. He forced the system to adapt to him. Fact 17. The gear of war. They didn't wear capes to look impressive. They wore them to survive the cold. In reality, Spartan equipment wasn't about style at all. It was built purely for function. Their bronze helmets were heavy and restrictive, limiting vision in battle, but they offered vital protection where it mattered most. Their shields were large and round, designed less for blocking blows than for driving forward. Locked together in formation, those shields formed a solid wall, unyielding and relentless. The spear was the true weapon of choice, not the sword, light, fast, and deadly, capable of striking or being thrown with frightening precision. Hollywood added spectacle, but Sparta perfected efficiency. There were no ornaments or flourishes, just tools meant to kill and endure. In Spartan culture, glory wasn't measured by appearance. It was earned by the enemies left on the ground. Fact 18. History versus fantasy. When 300 hit theaters, the backlash was immediate. Critics dismissed it as a cartoon, a fantasy, even an insult to real history. Some historians didn't just critique the film, they attacked it. The armor was wrong, the tactics were exaggerated. Xerxes certainly never stood 10 feet tall, draped in gold chains. But while scholars scoffed, audiences leaned in. Interest in Thermopylae surged. Books about Sparta began selling again. University courses filled with students who had never opened Herodotus before, but now wanted to. The film didn't aim to teach history with footnotes and precision. It did something else entirely. It sparked curiosity. And for all its slow-motion chaos and comic book blood, 300 proved one enduring truth. Legends don't have to be accurate to matter, but they do have to be unforgettable. Fact 19. The Crypteia. It sounds like something pulled from a horror film, but the Crypteia was real, and far darker than anything 300 dared to show. The movie hints at the Agoges' brutality, boys tested through pain and survival. But the final trial was left out, likely because in reality, it didn't end with endurance. It ended with blood. After years of conditioning, selected Spartan youths faced a last rite of passage. Sent alone into the countryside at night, they were ordered to kill helots, the enslaved population, anyone deemed a potential threat to Spartan rule. No armor, no support, just a blade, darkness, and orders. It wasn't training in the usual sense. It was state-sponsored terror, disguised as tradition, and it turned teenagers into shadows long before they ever became soldiers. Fact 20. The legacy of strength. It began as a way to look like warriors, but it became something much bigger. The cast of 300 didn't rely on stunt doubles or shortcuts. They trained hard, lifting sandbags, pushing through pain, and enduring a regimen that came to be known as the 300 workout. When the movie was released, audiences were stunned. People didn't just wonder how the actors got into that shape, they wanted to copy it. Gyms rebranded. Trainers built entire programs around Spartan-style conditioning. CrossFit gyms embraced brutal, high-intensity routines inspired by the film. Books, DVDs, and boot camps followed, all chasing the same carved, battle-ready look. But it wasn't only about abs. It was about mindset, discipline, endurance, and pushing past limits. The myth built muscle. And in the process, 300 didn't just change action movies, it reshaped how strength looked and how it felt.